Rakers, a science fiction action adventure. Part 5, The Prize. Chapter 41. The easy way. There were pills for this, and Veronica knew where to get them. White, rounded capsules that could knock out even the strangest thoughts. Could blunt the force of reality. A reality that no longer matched with the previous 18 years of her life. She'd always taken Christopher's rants with a grain of salt. The declarations of this or that wonder, miracles waiting for a few more years of research or a wild experiment to be unlocked. Inching towards those miracles had given her family its status, its money. But there was a difference between a phone that could talk back to you and a being that could come and go through swarms of tiny seeds. The gardener seemed to be everything her father had been striving for. And it was real. "Still shocked, aren't you?" Lode said. "I have them inside of me now, right?" Veronica couldn't feel the seeds. Didn't feel much different at all, really. "They're crawling around you. Keep themselves quiet until you need them. Then you'll be glad they're around." Lode shook out his hat, spraying water onto the rocks. "I do hate this comeback point. Always makes a mess." Veronica had barely noticed her soaked clothes. They were drying quick enough in the afternoon sunlight anyway. "When that table—" "The audience," Lode corrected without looking at her. "The audience," Veronica amended. "Are you sure killing Fade is the only way?" "Nah, it's never the only way." Lode stuck the hat on his head, let droplets drip down the side of his face and into his thin black beard. "It's just the easiest, for me." Lode had both badges now, and for all the traveling, Veronica had no idea how to use them. She needed to do two things: get Lode back to the compound, and find a way to make the cowboy do what she wanted. Because Christopher and her were on the same side, right? Lode walked away from the lake, towards the outdoor mall. The audience had shown Fade there. Veronica reached for her phone, but thanks to the water, nothing was working. She'd have to find another one. Call her father, get some help. The cowboy had his 2 pistols and looked like he planned to use them. If he shot Fade and vanished, well, that simply wouldn't happen. Veronica let Lode get a bit of a lead on her, and then she dropped off to a mobile phone stand. Asked for a cheap burner phone and got it. Dialed Christopher's number. One of 2, the other being her mother's, that she'd ever memorized. Help would be coming. She had to keep Fade and Lode alive till it got here. Chapter 42. Maul. Fade heard the hammer click, the telltale sound of a pistol getting ready to fire. He dove, not that there were many spots to dive to on the curb near the taxi stand. In fact, there was only one spot, a bench with a pair of potted plants and big cement vessels on either side. He rolled along the ground and expected to hear gunfire. Instead, he heard laughter. "Spooked you good," Lode said. Fade could hear the cowboy stepping closer, boots scuffing the concrete. Lode unleashed a winner's guffaw. "Real scared of that bench. Got yourself some great cover there." Fade looked around. Nothing he could use as a weapon. If he let Lode get around to his side, there'd be nowhere to go. So Fade turned, shifted on the balls of his feet, and rose into a crouch. "What did you do with my daughter?" Fade said. He could see Lode's hat over the bench coming closer. Another 2 or 3 steps. "What did you do to Jaycee?" "She didn't want to give me my gun back." "So you killed her?" "No idea. You'll have to talk to the gardener." Lode said the words like someone talking about milk not yet spoiled. "If I'm reading that thing's words right, though, I suspect your girl's still alive. Not like the gardener to kill someone, lest they make it angry." "Good to know. Doesn't change the fact that you shot her, cowboy. I'm not pulling any punches." "Wouldn't expect you to." As Lode stepped around the bench, leading with his pistol, Fade sprang up. High-stepped his left foot onto the edge of the plant pot and pressed off of it. Leapt into a flying tackle. Hit Lode in the chest before the man could fire. Drove the cowboy to the ground. Fade had to disarm Lode, get that pistol away. So as they hit the concrete, Fade slid his elbows out, shifted his hands down the cowboy's arms, and pinned Lode's wrist to the ground. A quick look to see that the cowboy had drawn only one of his 2 guns, the weapon still in Lode's right hand. Fade rolled that way as Lode tried to push him off. Used the momentum to turn along Lode's arm, and as Fade rolled, grabbed the pistol in his hands and tore it away. Fade came to a stop a yard away, sliding up to one knee, aiming the pistol dead center at the cowboy. He hadn't fired a gun since his wife died, but he'd make an exception this time. "Don't you get it by now?" Lode said, shaking his head at the pistol, his thick brown coat pulled around him. "That gun isn't going to do anything to me. It'll do a hell of a lot to you." Before Fade could react, Lode drew his other pistol, his finger cocking back the hammer as the pistol rose and then pulling the trigger as the gun leveled out. Fade felt the shot hit, strike his shoulder and spin him around. Pain flared through his left arm. Fade moved with the momentum, kept his pistol raised in his right hand. Pulled the trigger. The weapon roared and Lode flinched. Fade saw the mark on the man's jacket, but the cowboy didn't look bothered. Meanwhile, Fade could feel the blood spreading. A shoulder shot shouldn't kill him right away, but it wasn't going to help either. He could still bleed out, and his left arm was useless. Lode cocked the pistol again and aimed it at Fade's head. "You got gods to pray to. Now is the time," Lode said. "Drop the weapon!" The shout came from back towards the mall, a pair of security guards. Fade saw they only held tasers. Courageous, but stupid for them to go after an armed man. "We'll drop you if you make another move." Lode sighed, turned to the security guards and set his pistol on the ground. "This doesn't concern you two. Seeing as you're fighting in our mall, it does concern us." One of them, a bald-headed man who looked like he was about to sweat through his uniform, said. The two guards approached slowly. Fade set his gun down and pressed his hand to the wound. It came away wet, slick, and red. He'd been trained for this, how to keep going in event of a catastrophe. Problem was, this wasn't normal mission. This wasn't a normal problem. As the two security guards came up to Lode, one reached for a pair of handcuffs. Lode struck first, a 1-2 punch knocking out the first guard and sending him to the floor. The second tried to stumble back, pull up the taser, but Lode knocked it away, grabbed the guard by the shirt and threw him on the ground. "See what I told you? Should mind your own business, instead of getting wrapped up in things beyond you." Lode glared at the guard for a moment, making sure he wouldn't be getting up. The cowboy brushed his hands off on his coat, turned back to his gun, and Fade shot him with the taser. Pressed the button and sent the electrodes flying towards Lode's face. They struck, stuck, and sent the cowboy spasming to the ground. Fade dropped the weapon, reached over and picked up, in his right hand, one of the sets of cuffs. Limped over to Lode and looked at those closed, unconscious eyes, that slack mouth. That jacket could take bullets, but hit him in the face and Lode was just another man. It was hard cuffing him with one hand, and more than a few drops of his blood spilled onto Lode's jacket, but Fade clasped the metal around the cowboy's wrists, pulled out his phone when his vision began to swim. Fade sat on the ground, his back to Lode's unconscious body, as the world wavered. He needed a hospital, some sort of medical attention, real soon, or this was going to get messy. He opened the phone, heard a siren. Wheels pulled up behind him, up to the curb, and Fade figured help had arrived. Doors slammed, voices shouted. Maybe he would survive and see Jaycee again. Chapter 43. Advanced methods. The audience wasn't responding. Jaycee had been following Sassex's directions, telling the table, the program running in it, to set the door and send Jaycee back to where Lode and Veronica had gone. Not that she had a plan for what to do when she got there, but sometimes you had to take a first step in order to find the second. "Why isn't it doing anything?" Jaycee asked the spider-like creature, still hovering nearby. "Because I believe you are not a Raker." Sassex scratched its legs furiously. "I can't be sure, but it would seem appropriate for the gardener to allow only qualified creatures to use these devices. And there's not many like me that stumble in here by accident. Most that do wind up quite dead, I'm afraid." Sassex looked out over the courtyard towards some of the other creatures at the tables. "Some of the ones here are quite predatory. You may have been eaten outright had it not been myself that found you." That's comforting. Jaycee turned back to the table, slapped the surface, still showing her father's face in frustration. Can you do it? Set the door for me? I cannot. We aren't allowed to traverse to other worlds. Sussex didn't sound too upset by that rule. At least not unless the gardener declares it necessary. In my 1,000 years, I only saw it happen once, when a critical element of a valued civilization was in danger of being lost. Many Rakers went in, and we used every tool we had. Did it work? Depends on your definition of work. The civilization was indeed saved. But imagine being exposed to so many new and advanced technologies, so many species that you couldn't conceive existed? I don't have to imagine, Jaycee replied. So they went crazy or something. They've been unstable for centuries. We hardly ever see their assigned Rakers, as they're so busy attempting to keep order. Sussex gestured to an empty table, one that stood only a foot or so off of the ground. And yet it seems hope has come to you instead. What? Jaycee looked at the creature, who pointed a leg out towards the tower. Eve walked towards them, eyes and mouth angled and asking questions. The Raker approached the table with a questioning look for Jaycee, but addressed Sussex first. Scaring a young girl now, Sussex? Hardly, the creature said, and Jaycee picked up the happy tone. I think what brought her here scared her far more than a handsome specimen like myself ever could. He's been truly nice, Jaycee said. I'd probably be dead without him. Did he tell you how they eat? Eve cut the words with a smile. The reason they've got rocks on their legs? His planet is knotted with caves. They hide in the ceilings and devour things that come running by. That sounds natural, like normal predator behavior, Jaycee said to Sussex. I thought only advanced civilizations had Rakers. Oh, we are. The methods Eve notes are, well, for sport. Now anyway. Sure, Sussex, for sport. Eve put her hand on the table, twisted it away from Fade's face. I'm surprised to see you here. Jaycee told Eve the story, while Sussex bid a polite goodbye and scuttled off to join his fellows. At the news of Lode's gunshot, Eve looked up from the table, but soon enough went back. The audience shifted from the grid of lines and dots to a map of Jaycee's city, to a readout on Veronica Pline. Her father, Christopher, came next. Then a zoom-in on a strange building north of the city, a rectangle with a large rounded silo structure attached. That's where they're taking your father. Eve pointed to the image on the table. And Lode. Who's they? Christopher Pline and that security company that raided your house. I saw them drag your father and Lode into one of their SUVs. Was going to chase after them until I realized just how many there were. So what are you going to do now? For the first time, Jaycee actually saw worry caress Eve's face. Her smile faded into a straight frown, and Eve's eyes looked off towards the ground. I'm not sure. Alone, I can't break into that compound. Not without using devices beyond Earth's current level anyway. Current level? The audience tracks how advanced a civilization is, Jaycee. The gardener and the grove are full of incredible tools, weapons and other things. But if we brought them to a place that isn't ready to receive them, we could throw the entire world into chaos. So you're saying we need old-fashioned help? Yes, but we're already down a Raker, and Lode is both captured and potentially dangerous. Jaycee glanced down at herself. She felt fine. Perfect. And she'd been shot in the chest not long ago. If the Grove could perform miracles for her, then maybe it could do the same for someone else. I think I can get you the help you need. Jaycee nodded at the audience. We'll have to go back home first, though. Chapter 44. Recovery room. Nurses, surgeons, techs, an endless parade of people had been going to and from Talia's room since the surgery. Even a token inquiry from a police officer wondering if she knew who'd hit her. Her response, a white SUV full of gun-toting security forces. That had earned Talia a nonplussed stare and a case number, one that Talia felt sure she'd never hear about again. So she'd spent the past day in a drug-fueled numbness, paying vague attention to the room's television whenever she wasn't asleep. Until Jaycee walked in with the woman Talia had knocked off a cliff with her car. A woman who appeared entirely unhurt and who smiled at Talia when she came in the room. Uh, Talia managed to say. Shh, Jaycee cut her off. Don't talk. What's going to happen next won't make any sense. So you're just going to have to go along with it, all right? Talia raised an eyebrow. She wasn't strapped into the bed, but with a pair of broken legs and a fractured collarbone, she wasn't going to be doing much resisting. When the physician had read the litany of grievous wounds to her body, Talia was amazed she hadn't actually been killed. Apparently, the body of her own car, the sedan, had rolled over Talia at the right spots to keep her alive, and in terrible pain. So lucky, the physician said, as she ordered another dose of numbing narcotics. The woman took out a small green brooch and held it out in front of Talia. Grab onto it, the woman said. Don't let go. Jaycee took Talia's hand and guided it to the jewel. Together they clasped it, and Talia wondered if Jaycee had been seduced into some strange cult. That this was a sort of ritual, meant to restore her chi or heal her body with the power of some ancient deity. Instead, the hospital disappeared, and Talia found herself on a silvered floor. No IV drip, no bed. Only the crushing agony of a body not able to support itself suddenly landing on a hard surface. Talia gasped. Tears rushed to her eyes. She wanted to scream, and very well might have, except that the sheer shock of getting yanked from one reality to another blunted the pain. What the hell had just happened? We're in the Grove. Jaycee leaned over Talia, looking hard at her face to, presumably, see if Talia had survived the journey. There's a lot to explain, but the short answer is that the air here will make you feel better. I hope so, Talia croaked, because you've made me a lot worse. The pain will be gone soon, the woman said. Jaycee, keep her still. When she can move, bring her down to the courtyard. Before Talia could protest, the woman turned and left the room. Jaycee sat on the floor next to Talia, who couldn't turn her head to look at Fade's daughter. What is this place? Talia asked, and Jaycee told her. A strange reality far out in space, or in some other dimension. Jaycee wasn't really clear on that one. Manned by someone called the gardener. You realize this all sounds like nonsense. Talia would have argued harder, been more surprised or confused, but frankly, when all she could feel was the 1,000 nerve endings in her legs burning her every sensation away. Getting worked up about anything else was impossible. Trust me, I thought the same thing, Jaycee said. I would be dead if it was too. The cowboy, Lode, shot me, Talia. Came to my hotel room and shot me. I grabbed his badge, that's what we call the green jewel, and wound up here. The Grove brought me back. You were shot? Talia couldn't believe the words. Jaycee had always seemed so young, too innocent to take part in the adult world of bullets and blackmail, kidnappings and contracts. She supposed they had always suspected it could come back on Fade's daughter at some point, but that point had never been the present. Jaycee still had college. A career, maybe, away from it all. I've never felt anything like it before, Talia, Jaycee said, the words seeming addressed to herself as much as to Talia. You watch the movies all the time, see the shows and read the books, and the violence rolls over you. That afternoon, seeing our living room chewed to pieces, that was strange, crazy even. But I didn't get hurt. Somehow it still seemed separate, a part of some fantasy that wasn't really me, you know? I do, Talia said. She'd met Fade in the Special Forces, when the reality of what it took to take a life, to do what was so routine on the silver screen, hammered home to them. Training hadn't made it real. The uniform hadn't made it real. But when she pulled the trigger that first time and a paper target wasn't waiting on the other end, that stripped away the illusion. He has Fade now, Talia, Jaycee started again. Lode took my father. Eve and I are going to get him back, and we need you to help. That's why you're here, to get fixed up and then go with us. Figures. First chance at a vacation in years, and Fade takes it away. Vacation? You would have been in that hospital. But I wouldn't be getting shot at, which makes it a vacation. You and Dad are so strange. Talia smiled. Even that hurt. Less because her lips were scarred than because it required a bit of focus, pulled attention away from the rest of the pain, which only made her busted bones scream all the louder. Talia had already made a mental note, but she wrote it again. No more getting run over. She'd rather take a bullet. A knife. Do you feel it yet? Jaycee asked. It'll be like a prickle, like something sewing you together. Thalia felt it, things inside her mending her torn muscle, fixing her broken bones. The pain drained away, and as Jaycee continued to describe the grove and its purpose, Thalia realized there was no going back from this. They weren't merely humans any longer. Chapter 45. Dangerous dreams. Veronica had never seen that look on her father's face before. A small grin, yes, but with a deeper edge to it. His eyes crinkled as he reached out and placed his hand on her shoulder. Gripped it. I'm proud of you, Christopher Pline said to his daughter. Both badges back here. Even the reckless cowboy returned to our custody. Her father took a step back, walked over to his desk, and collapsed into the chair. Noonday sun played through the windows, stealing some of the stark flavor of the hyper-modern furniture. Veronica stayed on her feet, unsure of where to go next. Now, before you forget it, I want you to write it all down, Christopher said. Everything you told me. All that you saw over there. On what? Veronica said. Can I borrow your computer? I didn't get mine from home. Her father's grin widened. I was hoping I'd get to tell you this. Veronica, I'm giving you an office. Right here in this building. An office? Yes, you'll be working here. Directly with me, learning how this all is put together. Christopher leaned forward onto his desk. Now, I know what you're thinking. You don't even know what this company does, how it operates. But you'll learn. You've always been good at that. We'll start you with small things, and then you'll grow into my shoes. What was her father talking about? Veronica was barely 18, almost 9 months away from graduating high school. Father, what about school? College? She'd already started on the applications. Christopher was silent for a moment, his face twisting into a grimace. Then he stood up, came over to her, and again placed his hands on her shoulders. Not firm, not proud like before. No, this was the hold of someone looking for understanding, about to deliver bad news. Veronica, I hope you understand. There's no going back to the way things were before. Christopher lowered his head, looked at her from the tops of his eyes. Think about it. Could you go back to English class having seen what you've seen? Could you go to freshman orientation and talk about journeying to a place on the other side of time and space? I probably wouldn't tell that story. Of course not. Christopher let go, held up his hands. You could live a lie, ignore it all, and try to do your homework. Walk the same line as your classmates. Go for the grades, the dean's list and parties on Friday nights. You could be one of a million other students, Veronica. Or I could be here, Veronica said the words for him. I could be working for you, could be getting my hands dirty for you, could give up my life for you. For us, Veronica. Christopher slapped his desk, then pointed out the window, towards the sky. You have to understand everything out there, all of it. It doesn't matter. One day an earthquake will come and sweep it all away. Oceans will rise and wash our cities clean. Someone will press the wrong button and send the world into a fiery hell. No college you go to, no high school graduation will save you from that. But these badges, this stranger in his other world, they are the key. You sound like a maniac. Veronica rubbed her arms. You think the world's going to end? Is that what you're saying? Christopher shook his head violently. Veronica knew the look, had seen it a couple of times before. Whenever her father believed in something past the point of reason, past the point of caring what it cost to obtain. I'm saying we can survive anything, Christopher said. No matter the disaster, we can escape. We can live forever, learning and growing. We can save everyone with these badges if we learn how to make more of them. Didn't see that twist coming, Veronica replied. Save everyone? Why didn't you put that at the beginning? Now the last bits of happiness dropped away from her father's face. What's wrong with you, Veronica? I'm giving you an opportunity here. I'm not sure I want to take it. Veronica paused. Ellsworth had been shot, been killed, running blindly after opportunities. What is your plan, anyway? You couldn't even get one badge to work. We didn't have the Cowboy before, Christopher said. Now we have someone who can show us. Right, like he'll listen to you. He will, Christopher said, because we'll give him what he wants if he does. It turns out that your kidnapper has a reputation, a good one, as hard as that is to believe, people willing to pay on his behalf to set him free. Lode will have a choice. If he shows us how to use the badge, Fade is all his. If he doesn't, then Lode loses his man. So that's why they kept Fade alive. Veronica had watched them in the SUV, stopping the blood flow, running the man into an ad hoc operating room here at her father's compound, even though by the time they'd arrived, Fade hadn't looked that bad. Not like Ellsworth and Aaron. All of it to push Lode into revealing how the badges worked. A deal, Veronica said. I'll write down what I saw. I'll work with you. But after school, on the weekends, and I'm going to college. I don't think those are the terms, Father. I'm not giving up my dreams for yours. For a second, Veronica thought her father was going to explode into another rage. Instead, Christopher settled into a straight face and then stuck out his hand. Veronica stared at it. Shake it, Christopher said. Veronica, after double-checking her father's eyes, pumped his hand up and down once. Now, Veronica, we have a deal. They'll show you to your office. Try to get your thoughts down. And take a nap. We're going to have a very exciting evening. Chapter 46. Fatal Promise. He was on his back. Fade knew that much from how it felt. The pressure on his spine. Not a mattress then. Stiff. Maybe a cheap cot or a floor. There were no lights, at least not any on. Pitch black. The hum of an air conditioner gave a hint that he wasn't in a cave somewhere. Or dead. A slight breeze coasted through the room. Vented then. You awake yet, or am I just dreaming you're shifting over there? Lode's voice came out of the dark, low and annoyed. You didn't kill me. Not for lack of trying, Lode replied. Seems you have enough luck left. I moved, as you drew. Turn the shoulder. Anything to cut into the Cowboy's ego. Fate assumed that he'd been locked in here too. The Cowboy and the contract for hire together. Someone's idea of a good time. Wouldn't have mattered, Lode said. Where I hit you, arteries would have had you down cold in another minute or two. Guess they stitched you up good in that van. Guess they did. Fade tried to reach over, feel his shoulder, but his hands hit a strap. Tied down then. Tried his legs. Same fate. A restrictive band keeping him from moving more than an inch. I thought you were on their side. We had a deal. They changed the terms. Was it because you tried to kill me in the middle of a mall? Think it's because I have something they want. Your hat? Lode laughed. Doubt it. Eve took you to the Grove? Where all of my nightmares come alive and settle in to eat dinner? That'd be the place. Fade blinked at the black. Without any windows, a watch, or any sense at all, he was adrift. There didn't seem to be any way to know where he was or when he was. The only anchor to reality was a man Fade would like nothing more than to bend into a pretzel and break. But even that, even the simmering anger, stood distant here. What did you think when you first went there? Fade asked. That it wasn't much like Laramie, Lode said. But when I met the gardener, things started to make sense. Mind explaining it to me? You have to understand, Fade, I'm not killing you for anything personal. It's not business either, as all the damn movies say these days. Lode sighed. No, it's because you're standing in the way, an obstacle to this planet and the people on it. You understand? Have to say, I do not. The gardener, see, it's got a plan, wants to help people, and I'm not only talking about humans here, get to its level. The audience leads the Rakers, that's me and Eve, to the things standing in the way of that progress. Unfortunately, you are that thing. I'm somehow going to stop human progress? Apparently, usually means you're going to do something terrible or allow something awful to happen. Right, Fade pondered the idea. He didn't have access to nuclear weapons, wasn't taking contracts to kill presidents or destabilize the economy. A few restaurant beatdowns and kidnappings weren't going to throw the world off its line, were they? When Eve and I went to the audience, Fade said, it told us you were the new target. You were the risk. Heard that. Targets can change, though. It's a guess. Who's the most likely problem at any given moment? Sounds like you're making an argument against the audience in the first place, Fade replied. If you can't be sure the target is still, the target, then how can you do anything? Lode didn't speak for a minute. Fade wanted to shake his head, but they'd strapped that down too. No movement for him. Still, if Eve and Lode had never asked themselves whether what they were doing made sense after all their decades killing and affecting people, then Fade was about to lose what little respect he still had for the Rakers. When he and Talia took a contract, they made sure it was legitimate, that the goals weren't sinister, greed notwithstanding. It's not perfect, Lode finally said. You can take a look at history and see how close we've come to losing it all over the years. The gardener isn't God. It's like playing a hand. We've got a couple of aces, and there's a promising river on the table. You have to place the bets and hope you win out. You're using a gambling metaphor to talk about my life. My daughter's life. She wasn't supposed to get shot, Lode said. But there's the thing, Fade. If I'm trying to save everyone, I'm willing to have casualties. It happens. Remind me to never forget you're a heartless bastard. I will. Lode went silent. Fade closed his eyes. His shoulder throbbed. How long do you think we'll be stuck in here? Till they decide to kill us, Fade said. You maybe, Lode replied. Me they'll try to use. Use? They want the badges. That man, the girl's father, he wants to go to the Grove. Lode chuckled. Thinks it's some kind of promised land. I might let him go just to see the look on his face. See all that disappointment. Right before I shoot him. Chapter 47. Expensive reinforcements. Talia couldn't believe she could walk, had been walking. Couldn't believe what she was doing as she slid into the driver's seat of her sedan, cleaned up and ready to go, though the mechanic was going to charge her for the total loaner, to which Talia didn't have a great reply. She'd get more contracts and the mechanic gave her a payment plan. Eve had dropped her off after shattering Talia's mind over and over again as they went through the Grove and was now going to deliver Jaycee to a friend's house. Then the two of them would meet north of the city and figure out how to approach the compound, the place where they were holding Fade, where the cowboy had taken him. Talia pushed the gas pedal, left the parking lot, and luxuriated in the simple feeling of her foot responding to her command. A shift in the muscles, a response from the nerves, the thrum of an engine. She'd only been in the hospital for a day, but she hadn't been able to move, had barely been able to feel her damaged, broken legs. But when she'd thanked the gardener, the gray metal thing standing in front of that giant sphere for giving her body back, it hadn't looked happy. Too many, Eve, the gardener had said, looking at the group of them, the three women. The Rakers depend on secrecy to be effective. On every planet with every civilization that has come to know their existence, disaster followed. We can trust them, Eve had said. Talia had echoed the statement. Nobody would believe us anyway. Jaycee, Talia thought it was a miracle she'd lived through that assault on the house. Fade ought to be proud as hell. You would be surprised what can be believed, the gardener replied. We can worry about that after, Talia had said. For now, let's focus on the objective. They had stared at her for that one, a reminder that Talia was the newest to this particular show. Perhaps surprised Talia wasn't more out of whack, wasn't stunned by the setting, by the badges and the audience and all the rest. Thing was, Talia had a knack for focusing on what mattered, on excluding everything else and dealing with it later. That's why she and Fade worked so well together. She kept him oriented, and Fade kept her from forgetting the big picture. Oh, yeah. Talia turned onto the highway, headed east, inland. Afternoon clouds pasted shadows on the rolling hills in front of her, a better picture than the traffic Talia began running into. By the time Eve managed to get to the meeting place, it would probably be well into evening. They'd be conducting this rescue after dark. Talia preferred it that way. Less glare in the scope. Her phone beeped. Talia would have glanced at it, but the highway had enough action to make looking away from the windshield a dicey proposition. When her phone buzzed a minute later, though, she answered the call. "Hands free," a voice coming through the speaker. "Talia," her uncle. "The hospital called, said you disappeared. I've been trying to reach you all day." "I've been busy, apparently." "How are you moving? How did you get out?" "Help, Uncle. That's how? What's going on?" The gardener's warning whisked through her mind. Couldn't share details with her uncle. Not now, anyway. "I'm guessing by your tone of voice, you didn't get the message just now?" "I'm driving." "Then let me regale you. Your friend Fade. Appears he got himself into some trouble while you were getting fixed up. Christopher Pline took him." Her uncle let the words die, waiting for some reaction. A gasp, maybe. A curse. "Heard that?" Talia gave him neither. "From who?" "I only received the note a minute ago." "I've got my sources." "You're awfully cagey for someone who nearly died a day ago." "I'm sorry." Talia wasn't sorry. "I don't have time for casual conversation." "Neither do I. Now that I know you're alive, I suppose you're going after Fade?" "Isn't that what partners do? Help each other?" "I've looked into the firm Pline's employing, Talia. You're not going to fare well by yourself." "Are you suggesting something?" Talia could practically see her uncle's face splitting into a grin. This is what he lived for now. Deals and bargains. Plays on his metaphorical chessboard. Talia, another piece for him to move around. Problem was, listening to him, Talia didn't see how she could say no. Chapter 48. Captive Cowboy. When Veronica opened the door, she wondered if she'd find the two prisoners dead, broken free of their bonds and at each other's throats. A battle Lode would likely win, seeing as Fade had been shot in the shoulder. But they were both there. Fade on the cot, Lode tied to a chair, asleep. "Clearly we're not scary enough," Veronica announced. Lode jerked awake while Fade opened one of his eyes and rolled it to her. She looked at Fade as she talked. It felt good, setting the scene, telling them how it was going to go. Coming from a lifetime so far of being the one without power, Veronica was starting to see the appeal. "Either let me go or kill me." Lode spoke but didn't bother to look at her. He seemed, in fact, to be bored. "You know, I did like you." Veronica took 3 long steps over to the cowboy and lifted off his hat. She'd told the 0-point guards to leave it with Lode. Didn't want to make an absolute enemy of the man. "But now you're reckless. You'll give me that back or you'll be regretting it." Lode still didn't turn his head. Annoying. Veronica launched the hat across the room. It hit the far wall without much sound and plopped to the floor. "You want that hat back? You're going to do as we say." She turned back to the door. If neither of them wanted to talk, then she'd leave. Finish writing down her memories of the Grove. Boring, but safer. "You know who you're talking to?" Lode said, and for the first time Veronica could hear a bit of anger in his voice. She stopped, smiled at the door. "I've been in the cells of a dozen dictators worse than you and your crazy father. Been in wars more violent than any of your so-called security could comprehend. Veronica, you're making a dangerous enemy right now." "Ellsworth made threats too," Veronica replied, turning around. "He wound up dying in his own car. You'll show me how the badges work, or you'll get the same treatment." Lode gave her a steel glare. Defiant. She should? No. Her father overreacted. Her father threw tantrums that blinded his own brilliance. She would not be him. Veronica would not make his mistakes. "We're selling him." Veronica pointed at Fade. "Turns out he's got a lot of fans, people that will pay to see him out of that cot and back doing his job." "You can't do that," Lode said. "He needs to die." "I don't recall that being my problem," Veronica said. "Of course, we're willing to make a trade." "Two people fighting over me," Fade said. "I love it." "Shut it," Lode said. "Name the terms." "The badges," Veronica replied. "Show me how they work, and I'll let you go. You can do what you want with Fade after that." Lode sat back in the chair. stared at Veronica. Slowly, a grin crept over his stubbled face. Show you how they work? Not daddy? Veronica folded her arms, didn't bother saying anything, gave Lode the glare he'd earned. Aren't families wonderful? Fade said from the cot. They ignored him. Tell you what, Lode said. You let me go right now, and I won't kill you later. One more time, Cowboy. One more chance to say yes, or I'm walking out this door and telling them to get Fade ready to go. Veronica expected another quip from Jaycee's dad, but he stayed quiet this time. His eyes were open, though, and Veronica could see Fade testing the strength of the restraints. A waste of energy. You remember how the audience said I was the target? There in the grove? Lode said. Maybe. See, the target causes all kinds of disruption. They're dangerous because they upset the order of things. Veronica, do you know why I'd never say yes to you or your dad? Apparently not. Because as soon as you fools figured out those badges, you'd have people streaming into the grove. Guess what happens then? The gardener decides humanity's a failed experiment. Decides to wipe the table. Start over. You're saying it'd kill everyone? Veronica shook her head. You're ridiculous, Lode. Nah, I'm just dangerous. Lode stood, the chair binding against his ankles, leaned forward and made a run towards Veronica. The hatless cowboy, bald head framed by long greasy locks, ran straight at her. Veronica danced back, outside the door. It slammed shut as Lode turned his own shoulder into it. Bounced off, but Veronica could see the cowboy's face. He was laughing. Chapter 49. Ordinarily, the prospect of a night at Allie's house would have been cause for celebration. A dinner that wasn't takeout, a change of the usual empty house while her father vanished on business that went to random hours. Even with school in the morning, they'd watch movies and plan out trouble to cause on the weekend. Now, Jaycee didn't want to go, didn't want to leave the company of a woman who, by her own comments, had to be more than 100 years old, who was planning on engaging in the types of violence Jaycee had thought confined to the realm of popular entertainment, who had at one point tried to kill her own dad. You can't, Eve replied, when Jaycee insisted for the third time that she'd be an asset. It's not that you wouldn't be useful, except that it is. Hey, you don't know that. Tell me, Jaycee, then, how would you help Talia and I? Eve kept her eyes on the road. Navigating the rush hour traffic, though it was less the speedy slalom Jaycee always wanted in a car, and more a slow shifting, as tired drivers stopped and started their way along. Look, I know Veronica. I mean, not well, but I know her. Of her. I've been to her house. Jaycee wasn't sure where she was going with this, but felt certain a solid conclusion would appear at some point. I might be able to guess what she's going to do. I don't think that girl is going to be the problem. Well, her father won't be too different, right? Isn't that the whole saying? The apple doesn't fall far from the tree? Eve laughed. I don't think this is what they were thinking of. Eve slid the car into the right lane and they went down the off-ramp. Took a right turn towards the hotel, a room where not long ago Jaycee had been shot. The thought stopped her talking, and the two of them kept going in silence until Eve pulled her small SUV into the parking lot. You still have the key? Eve asked as they left the car. I must have forgot to grab it as I was bleeding on the floor, Jaycee replied. She shivered. She could see the balcony from here. Curtains drawn, but she was sure the third-story window, there on the left edge of the building, belonged to her room. Do you think they cleaned it? Lode would have put the Do Not Disturb sign on the door, Eve said as they walked into the lobby. Out of habit. Whether that habit was for keeping murder victims hidden for as long as possible or a peaceful night, Jaycee didn't ask. I'm staying in room 315, Jaycee announced to the clerk, who, as she announced the room number, proceeded to twitch a couple of times, as though Jaycee had shocked him with a buzzer. I'm sorry, what? The clerk asked. 315, Jaycee repeated. It's my room, but I lost the key. Can I get another? Wait. The clerk stared at Jaycee. Is there a problem? Eve broke in, stepping up next to Jaycee. We just need the key so she can get in. Right, the clerk said. See, there's an issue with that room. Namely, someone died there last night, I heard. It took Jaycee a second to realize. The bloodstain. But she didn't have her backpack. The computer. The police have it all. Evidence, they were saying. The clerk stared at the two of them like he was seeing ghosts, which in a way he was. Jaycee shouldn't have survived, but thanks to a device created by some creature she didn't understand, here she stood. A minute later, Eve and Jaycee were standing outside the hotel. "Where is the police station?" Eve asked. "If it's close by, we could go?" "I don't know." Jaycee didn't even have her phone. This whole plan was predicated on the standing invitation she had to crash at Allie's any night, an agreement partially pushed for by Fade, given his unpredictable schedule. "Then what should we do?" "You're asking me?" "I see your point, Jaycee." Eve took out her own phone, reaching behind, as always, and pulling it from her backpack. Flipped it open and stared at it for a second. "We are running out of time before I need to meet Talia. You could take me with you. I could leave you here, and you could find another way to your friend. I have no money, no phone. I don't know this neighborhood, and I think the clerk back there might faint if I go back in. I do not know your father well, Jaycee, but I feel he would not be surprised to hear this come from you." Eve put a hand on Jaycee's shoulder. "It's decided then. You'll come with us. But, and I do not say this lightly, you will do as we say, without complaint, without hesitation. Because the moment we leave this hotel, this stops being a game." "I get it." Jaycee didn't skip back to Eve's car, didn't laugh or cheer or pump her fist. This was what she'd wanted, going off to save her father. Then why did she feel so sick? Chapter 50. Fade for sale. They'd kept a gun on him while Fade had changed. Another guard helped get the blazer on, seeing as Fade's left shoulder didn't feel like working. That's what happens when you get shot. Can't put on nice clothes anymore. After ramming the door, which had been a fun show, Lode had settled back into his glum grumble. The cowboy didn't even bother with his hat, didn't move when they came for Fade, though that might have been because the man who had covered Fade during dress-up had kept the barrel aiming in Lode's direction until they had Fade out of the room. Altogether, Fade thought it was the nicest outfit he'd ever worn. A jacket the color of deep ocean, pants a stormy sky, a snowy shirt, and shoes the color of dry sand. An outfit for all climates. The guard didn't laugh when Fade made the joke. "You take your job too seriously," Fade said as they ushered him out of what looked like a meeting room, hastily converted into a dressing chamber. "You don't understand where you are," the man replied. "Bunch of people are coming that want to buy you, some who want to kill you, and you're trying to be funny? Lose the laughs, and you'll be dead whether or not your heart's beating, my friend." Fade could have continued, could have explained that his life was one long string of life and death decisions, so if he didn't tell bad jokes and chuckle at the awfulness of it all, he'd never laugh. They took Fade, a guard on either side holding his arms and the third behind with the gun, down a long hallway to a central staircase. A rather nice one too, if a little plastic for Fade's taste. The whole array of chrome and silver on the stairs themselves seemed over the top, like a 60s-era spy villain's secret hideout. The flowing molecular diagrams going up and down the shaft were neat, though, and the dates scribbled onto them with company highlights gave an at-a-glance history for Fade to work with. Someone had put some effort into that. Down they went, and then into a large circular space with a low ceiling. Going by the marks on the floor, it looked like a covered parking lot. To the right of their door were a series of chairs, the metal folding kind used when you want to ensure your guests won't be comfortable enough to stay long. In front of the arranged chairs was a solo option. All for Fade. "You're selling me off in a garage?" Fade said to the guard. "We'd rather the guests not get too far inside," said a voice that was definitely not the guard tying Fade to the chair. "I'm not generally a fan of your type of people." Christopher Pline, the orchestrator himself, had made his appearance. Like Fade, the billionaire sported an outfit more appropriate for fine dining than the auctioning off of a kidnapper. "If it makes you feel any better, we're generally not a fan of your type of people either," Fade countered. Pline gave him a shrug, then set about ordering his menagerie to their places. Fade watched them move chairs around, set up a couple of tables with the sort of bar's basic set of pastries and beverages. "Pline, you're inviting all my friends to your place," Fade said as he saw the food brought in. "The least you could do is show them a good time. Even us lowlifes go better than this for our parties." "I'm not interested in your friends. Not interested in you either." Pline stayed close to Fade, though, surveyed his servants. "If Lode did as we need him to, I'd be happy thrusting you out on the street right now and forgoing all of this nonsense." "What about your daughter? No vengeance?" Pline looked down at Fade, both in the sense that he was taller than Fade right then, and, Fade felt, as though Fade were so far below Pline's radar that the fact they were speaking to each other rankled him. "Had you asked me that yesterday, I may have agreed with you, may have ignored this whole charade in favor of taking you up into the hills and emptying around into you myself. However, right now, you are a means to an end. That is all I care about." Veronica must love hearing that. She understands. Pline didn't equivocate. The words weren't frustrated. No, Christopher Pline believed his daughter saw the world as coldly as he did. Fade wasn't sure Pline was wrong. A guard came up and whispered briefly in Pline's ear, and his captor squatted next to Fade. "It seems our first guest will be arriving soon. Just so you know, if Lode instructs my staff in the use of the badges, you will be handed over to him to do with as he sees fit. If Lode fails to do this within the next 2 hours, then I will accept whatever offer is highest, and that will be that. I hope your friends have thick wallets." Pline straightened, moved to walk away. "If I were you," Fade said to the man's back, "if I had the person who'd taken my daughter away from me, there would be no auction. There would be no games." "And that lack of vision, Fade," Pline said, half turning his head back to his prisoner, "is why you are in that chair, and I am here." Fade watched the billionaire leave the garage, then asked a guard for some coffee. The guard said no,